This is a video lecture series for middle school science where you'll be able to play, pause, fast forward, or rewind at any point in this video. And this video is going to concentrate on the world of bacteria. Bacteria many times will be something that's fearful for people. When they hear about it, they try to steer away and make sure that they don't catch any bacteria or be able to touch it because they might fear that it might make people sick. And we maybe want to avoid people, make sure we don't get any on us. But in fact, it's been found that the sicknesses and illnesses will come from this world of bacteria and cells. But there are many bacteria that are actually helpful to you. And there is bacteria that we actually need in order to survive. And the world has bacteria all over the place, and that bacteria is essential for the world to continue on. Because there are leaves that fall within the forests. There are rabbits that die. There are animals that pass away, or people that die as well. If we didn't have bacteria, those things would live there forever, and they would not leave. So bacteria is essential. They're like our garbage disposal within the world, and help us to recycle things, make things new. So sometimes we might think of bacteria being able to spread from a person to another person, or maybe by shaking hands, or maybe by sharing something together. Like if we sit on the toilet, another person actually comes to sit on there. Maybe germs or bacteria can spread from one person to another that way. That's why they actually make seat covers that can actually go onto the seats of toilets to try to maybe reduce the spread of bacteria. But in reality, toilets, even public ones, are actually very clean. The places where you'd actually find bacteria inside your house may be in the bathroom, but you'll actually find more bacteria in like a dish rag or a sponge that you might use, or a rag that you might use to clean the floors. Even if you've washed those down, you actually might find more bacteria in those than you would on the toilet. Or you might actually find more in your sink than on the toilet. Other places where you might actually have bacteria is if you take like a Q-tip or a cotton swab, and we put that inside of your mouth or on other, like on your hands or on other parts of your body, and we place that onto a petri dish, we could try to smear some of that on, and we put that into a warm, moist environment, and we can actually see bacteria that can actually grow from there. So we have bacteria almost everywhere in the world, and even on your body. Now, some of the types of bacteria that live in extreme environments where few organisms can actually survive. So bacteria is actually going to be found everywhere, even in places that are super cold, like close to Antarctica, or you actually find some in areas that are very, very hot. Some near underwater volcanoes, you would find some certain bacteria that are able to live in hundreds of degrees Fahrenheit of temperature, where other things will not be able to live. There are some bacteria who can live in acidic environments, or places with really strong acids where other things wouldn't be able to live. So bacteria are going to be classified and could be described as having basically three different shapes. One of them is going to be spheres, the other one's going to be rods, and the other ones are going to be spirals. And they're actually going to have more scientific names. Those scientific names are going to be these here. So there's a sphere-shaped bacteria are called cocci. Rod-shaped bacteria are called bacilli, and spiral-shaped bacteria are called sporilla. So cocci are sphere-shaped bacteria, bacilli are rod-shaped bacteria, and sporilla are spiral-shaped bacteria. Now here are some pictures of these where it can have cocci type of bacteria, and they're actually going to be round. So I can have round bacteria, and this type is going to be Staphylococcus aureus, where the bacteria is going to be more round shaped. Now if we look through a microscope and we actually look at this type of bacteria, we might find something that's more of a rod shaped bacteria. That is going to be bacilli. So an example of that will be Bacillus subtilis. And that is going to be a type of bacteria that is going to be more of a rod-shaped bacteria. Now, if we see here, when we look under a microscope, we might have bacteria that actually looks like spirals, or a spiral-shaped type of bacteria. That is going to be Spirilla. So an example of that is going to be Spirillum voltans. Just by looking at the name Spirilla, that gives us a clue that this is going to be a spiral-shaped bacteria. While if I look at Bacillus and look at that name, that gives me a clue that this is a rod-shaped bacteria. And if I see here this says cocci in it, this is going to give me the hint that this is a round-shaped bacteria. So bacterial cells are many times can be classified as prokaryotic. So prokaryotic bacteria or cells are going to be cells that do not have a nucleus or do not have nuclear bound membranes, which means there's going to be many organelles that's going to be absent from inside of a prokaryotic cell. So prokaryotic cells, once again, are going to be cells that do not have a nucleus. So some bacteria also have an outer coating called a slime layer, or sometimes that's going to be called a capsule. So some bacteria have this outer coating, that's this slime layer, and what it does is a slime layer enables a bacterium to stick to surfaces, and it also helps them to reduce water loss. So that's why many bacteria are going to live in wet, warm environments. And that bacteria is able to stick to surfaces, like your hands, or like on a cell phone, or in the bathroom. Also, it likes to be in moist areas where it's able to retain water or hold on to water. Now, many bacteria that live in moist conditions also have whip-like tails called the flagella to help them move. So if it has multiple tails, that's going to be called the flagella, and those tails are going to whip around. So flagella actually means to whip, and that's going to help the cell to move. So here is a picture of a type of bacteria. If we see here, there is no nucleus or center of the cell. Instead, it's going to have genetic material that's going to be basically just inside and around the cell. On the outer portion, you'll actually see here a slime layer, and that slime layer is this moist layer, or once again it's called a capsule as well, that allows the bacteria to be able to stick to certain areas and help to retain moisture. On the bottom part over here, we'll see a tail-like structure that is going to whip around. If there's only one, that's called a flagellum. And that flagellum will actually help it to whip around, sort of like a boat almost. When this whips around, this will help this cell to move. And this one, specifically, we have these little hair-like structures that come out from it. Those hair-like structures can actually vibrate. And if they vibrate, they can actually help this cell to move as well. And that's called cilia. So cilia are going to be these hair-like structures that can appear on the outside of a cell, and if it does, those will vibrate to be able to help the cell to move. Now, bacteria as well are able to reproduce. So it'll move to try to get energy if it needs in other areas, sometimes to try to get food. And then it'll also be able to reproduce. So fission is a process that produces two new cells with genetic material that's identical to each other and that of the original cell. So they're all going to be the same when they reproduce. It can have two identical cells that have the same genetic material and the same physical features. Now, most bacteria are consumers, which means they need to go get food or energy from their environment in the form of food, or needs to get it from other places, even in some cases other bacteria. An organism that uses oxygen for respiration is called aerobe. So this is the description. We can describe a bacteria as an aerobe when it uses oxygen for respiration. Respiration, once again, is going to be where we break down something to try to get energy. Now, if we break down something to try to get energy from it, that is called respiration. So we can break down sugar to try to get energy from it. And to break down sugar, we might need oxygen. And in that case, that type of bacteria is going to be an aerobe. In contrast, an organism that is adapted to live without oxygen is called an anaerobe. So an anaerobe is going to be an organism that's adapted to live without oxygen, and it can break down and get energy without using oxygen to do so, and that's going to be called an anaerobe. So ana is without, aerobe is going to be a type of respiration that can actually occur, and that is without oxygen. So in this case over here, I can actually have a bacteria that is more rod-shaped, and then when this actually can separate or break apart, and I'll actually have two cells that are identical to each other, exact twins, have the same exact genetic material and physical features of each other. Now this over here, I can actually have more coxy type of bacteria that can now separate from each other, and I can actually have two new cells that have the same genetic material. Now fission means to cut, so I can actually have this bacteria try to cut off from each other, and I can now have two new cells from this being cut right down with the same genetic material. Now if I have bacteria here that's going to be near the surface of the water, what can happen is the bacteria can actually use oxygen to be able to help break down the sugar within its body, and that is going to be a type of bacteria that is called an aerobe. So aerobe is going to be where it uses oxygen to be able to help break down like sugar to get its energy. Now here I can have bacteria underwater, really deep, nearby hydrothermal vents, or going to be like underwater volcanoes, where we have magma that can come up through the earth, come up to the surface as lava, and these areas are going to be super hot. But I can still have bacteria that can live in this area and without the presence of oxygen. So if there is no oxygen in this area here, these type of bacteria can actually be able to break down and get the energy that they need by not using oxygen. That's called an anaerobe. So these type of bacteria will be an anaerobe, where it does not need oxygen. Now there are some bacteria that can actually are producers, where it can actually go through type of photosynthesis to be able to make its own energy, and it's going to be a producer. Now this type of bacteria you can actually find sometimes in rivers or ponds, and you'll actually see this bright green color. That type of bacteria is called a cyanobacteria. So of the bacteria, there's actually classified into two kingdoms. So we can have two main groups. One is called eubacteria, and eubacteria is going to be a type of bacteria, and the other one is going to be called archaeobacteria. So we have eubacteria and archaeobacteria. So one important group of producer eubacteria is the cyanobacteria. So the cyanobacteria are going to be like those little green bacteria that we've shown just before that can be on the surface of waters, like in rivers or ponds, and it gives a green-like color to the water. Now archaeobacteria are going to be divided into groups based on where they live and how they actually get energy. So they are the bacteria that we'll find in rare and extreme conditions. And because we have bacteria that can live in extreme conditions, that's why when we use hand sanitizers, they can only get rid of 99.9% of bacteria. So to review some of the information that we've learned about this lesson here are cocci, sporilla, bacilli, flagella, aerobe, anaerobe, eubacteria, and archaeobacteria.